let's get into topic.
Okay, so before we get started, if you want to introduce yourself,
Yes.
tell everybody what you do, who you are, all of that.
Yeah, I'm Melissa Lapides, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I specialize in trauma, like emotional trauma and attachment wounding.
Wow. Okay.
That's
So
amazing.
so now when you say you specialize in that, like that's like your population of people that you deal with. Um,
Yes.
what type of stuff, this is what I want to know, is like what sort of things do you see? What sort of trauma do you see?
Yeah. So a lot of it is people who grew up with parents that have personality disorders or people that grew up in abusive households, people that have been in narcissistic abusive relationships. What else? That's pretty much my population right there.
So you're dealing with a lot of aftermath of like, so you know a lot about narcissism.
And all the personality disorders and the trauma that comes along with being in relationship with anybody that has a personality disorder, whether it's family member, spouse, business partner, whoever.
See, that's the one thing that I'm really intrigued to go on because not a lot of people realize that they're in a narcissist relationship or they have, whether it be a husband, a wife, a friend, a parent, that if we could touch base on what they need to, what am I looking for?
What are the signs
Yes,
that
what
you
signs
like?
you
How do
have?
you know you're dealing with a narcissist? Like, what are the, because there's different types of
Yeah.
narcissism too, right?
Yes, I think so.
Absolutely. There are definitely different types. Like some are covert and some are more outright, right? And so it's very tricky, especially if you grew up in a household like that. How are you supposed to know that anything's wrong if that's all you know from the time
Right.
you're a child, right? And so that becomes the norm. And when we talk about what are the signs, it's confusing. That's the biggest sign, is that your relationship with this person is confusing. And
Mm,
we don't have to be confused in our relationships. Our relationships, healthy relationships, are safe. We feel good in them. We're not questioning ourselves in them. And they're nourishing for the most part, right? You have small ruptures, but you repair them pretty easily. When you're in a relationship with somebody that has a personality disorder, it's very confusing. You constantly are spiraling in your head. You're wondering if this is you, if this is them. And the nature of the connection is just confusing because sometimes it's one way and sometimes it's another way, and there's
Mm.
no consistency. But again, for a kid, like I'll just say for myself, I grew up, my dad is clinical sociopath. I didn't know that wasn't normal. So for me, chaos, confusion, feeling wounded in the relationship was just what you do in
That
relationships,
was
right.
that
right?
was a Tuesday for you.
Mm.
Exactly. So then getting into a narcissistic relationship was like a step up because it wasn't as bad as being in a relationship with a sociopath, right?
Mm.
So this is the problem, is so many people that I work with, they don't have a reference for healthy, and that's really sad. It's so sad because it's typical that when you have a parent that has a personality disorder, I always say it's like being struck by lightning. You're more prone to get into repetitive relationships with people that have personality disorders because we seek familiarity and that feels like home to us, right?
Right.
And
Mm.
so often we'll repeat that pattern over and over and over.
Mm.
Oh yeah,
That makes sense.
I've repeated it
Yeah.
a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, and now I mean, some of the personality disorders, because I mean, I feel like the most popular one that everybody talks about is narcissism, but there's a lot of
Mhm.
personality disorders. Um,
Yes.
what would you say, just like from your clinical experience, is the most would be the most like damaging or dangerous?
So I'd say the top three are narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and I was going to say like some of the schizoid ones are hard for children because the parent has a flat affect, and so there's no emotional validation and you're just left very confused, but it's not as painful as the other two
Mm.
because I'm sorry, that's not even the one I wanted to bring up. I wanted to bring up a sociopath because that's just like, but that's so rare. It's like so rare, right? So the more common ones, like I've met one other person in my life that had a sociopathic parent before. So it's the rarest of the personality disorders. Narcissistic and borderline are a lot more common. And the reason why all three of those are so confusing is because there's a back and forth, right? So it's like Jekyll and Hyde, that story
Mm.
of you get the good and you get the bad, and it flip
Bad.
flops and it flip flops. And so it's really hard to make sense of it because there are good times and good moments
Mhm.
and good interactions with that person
Right.
sometimes, right?
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. It's insane.
Yeah, we were kind of just talking about that, like, in our last episode we were talking about like toxic relationships, and we were saying that because we both have experience in that department, and we were saying that the highs are really high, but the lows are like
They're low. Like when you're in your high moment, like I was saying before, when you're on your high, you forget for a second about what it was last week that they did to you, because the high feels so good while you're up there. But then when that low comes back, then it's like a reminder again of like all the crap you just went through.
and that's
It's
not
like
that. Oh yeah, no, what were you gonna say?
it's like being a heroin addict. It's the same
Yes.
thing that happens neurologically to your brain, and you start to get addicted to those highs and lows, right?
Right.
So it's very common that you forget everything that happened last week, right? Because all of a sudden now they're being amazing.
Yes.
And
And the love
another thing,
bombing.
yeah, and another thing is oftentimes they're not like that with everyone. So then they have all these friends and people that are like speaking so highly of them. But when we talk about especially narcissistic personality disorder and borderline, they usually only have a couple people that they act that out on. So it's not everybody. And this is where it becomes confusing because, say, Jenny, I'm just throwing this name out there, is a narcissist and her spouse gets the abuse and maybe one of her children, but everybody else she's pretty consistent with all around. And so then it
Mm.
becomes even more confusing, right? Because they only need supply off of a few people. And when I say supply, that means where they get that fix of creating chaos and confrontation and spiraling in that cycle, right? So they
Yeah.
don't do
Yeah.
that with everybody.
Now, okay, so now you deal with the trauma aspect of it, like obviously the aftermath, I would assume. What's in that area, what's some of the work that you do? Because like I know that her and I have have a lot of trauma. Some worked through, some not. So like what sort of work do you do in that department?
Yeah. So a lot of it is, first of all, normalizing and validating that experience and really giving a lot of psychoeducation because people that are in it, and I know I could speak from my own experience, like you don't even know that this is all textbook stuff, right? It's not like you're alone or imagining it. So giving people information and educating them on this is so helpful because all of a sudden you're feeling really validated. Can you remember the first time picking up some article or something on narcissistic abuse and you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm not imagining it, right? Like this is
Yeah.
Yeah.
real.
Yeah,
So
because
that
you do tend to feel crazy sometimes in those
Mm.
relationships.
you definitely feel crazy. That's like one of the biggest red flags too, is you feel crazy because it's so unstable, right? And so helping somebody reestablish what safety feels like in a relationship is what the therapy is about, first and foremost. It's giving them a reference point of a stable, safe relationship. And in that relationship, you can do the healing, right?
Yeah. So,
I'm sorry, baby. Well, another thing that you touched on was that they make you feel like you're crazy. So when something goes wrong, they never take accountability, right? Is that something common with a narcissist where they're like, oh no, it's because of you, this isn't right. It's because you're taking it and turning, you know what I mean?
Yeah, they make you feel like the crazy one, literally. And then you're like, am I? Am I?
Yeah,
Am
you
yeah,
I?
start questioning yourself.
yeah,
So that's a normal,
Absolutely.
that's one of their traits would be like shifting it and turning it to you like you're the issue.
Gaslighting, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
typical gaslighting, and it's so destructive on the person that is on the receiving end of that because it literally can make you feel, and it can actually make you crazy. And there's something that's called reactive abuse, right? When the person who is the victim of the narcissistic or borderline, whatever, abuse then becomes abusive, right?
Yep.
This happens in a lot of relationships. You become violent because you're like trying to prove that you're not crazy, but
mm-hmm.
they just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, and you actually do become crazy, right?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay.